The sky above the alien world was heavy with smoke and strange colored clouds. The air shook with the sound of engines and marching feet. The Academy of War stood like a giant fortress with towers of black stone and gates taller than ships. Inside its walls, hundreds of cadets from many worlds lined in rows. Their armor gleamed in the light, their voices silent as they waited for orders. The drill sergeant was a massive reptilian alien, his scales dark green, his eyes sharp like knives. His voice thunder rolled to the ground. He walked with claws scraping against the stone floor. He studied the cadets one by one, proud of their fear, proud of their obedience, proud of their strength. Then his gaze landed on something strange, something small, something fragile. A human stood there, thin compared to the armored beasts around her, no claws, no fangs, no thick hide, only soft skin and a simple uniform. She looked almost out of place in this place built for giants. Whispers spread across the rows. Aliens with horns and armored shells bent their heads closer. Some smirked, some laughed. A human here, they said. It must be a mistake, a weakling among warriors. How long would she last? Perhaps a day, perhaps only an hour. The sergeant stopped in front of her. His shadow swallowed her whole. His laughter roared, sharp and cruel. This is the new cadet, a human. Look at this tiny creature, bones like twigs, arms like sticks. The galaxy calls them clever, but clever does not win battles. Strength wins, claws win, blood wins. His voice carried over the training grounds. The other cadets chuckled and hissed, their eyes flashing with amusement. The human did not flinch. Her eyes were calm. She stood straight, her face pale but steady. She did not answer. She did not smile. She only looked forward as if the laughter did not exist, as if the sergeant was nothing more than a gust of wind. Her silence made some cadets uncomfortable. Silence is a weapon. Silence is a shield. And the sergeant noticed it too. He crouched low, so his face was close to hers, his breath hot and foul, his grin wide with sharp teeth. Do you think you belong here, human? Do you think your fragile body will last a week? This academy is built on bones, and weak bones snap fast. He hissed the words with venom, but the human still did not move. Her calm gaze did not shift. Her hands stayed tight at her sides. Her chest rose steady with each breath. A few cadets in the back shifted nervously. They had seen fear before. They had seen weaklings tremble. But this human did not tremble. She did not sweat. She did not shake. And that was strange, too strange, because a creature so fragile should be afraid. Yet she was not. And the unease spread like a ripple through the ranks. The sergeant rose again, towering high, his tail sweeping the ground behind him. His laughter rang once more. Then we shall see what this little creature can do, he bellowed. The ground shook with his voice. He raised a claw and pointed toward the training pit, a great circle of stone where beasts waited in cages, beasts bred only for one thing, to crush and to break cadets who were too slow, too weak, too soft. The human turned her head at last, her eyes falling on the pit. No fear, no hesitation, only stillness. She nodded once, simple, small, but clear. She accepted the order. She accepted the test. Her movement sent another ripple through the crowd. Whispers grew louder. Aliens muttered about madness, about how quickly she would be torn apart, about how foolish it was for a human to even try. The gates of the pit opened with a grinding roar. The smell of blood and dirt rushed out. The beast inside stomped forward, taller than 3 men, armored hide like stone, tusks sharp enough to tear steel, its eyes glowing red with hunger. The cadets gasped in delight. This was no simple challenge. This was humiliation made real. No one believed she could last more than a breath. The sergeant grinned wide, his eyes gleaming with cruel joy. Enter the pit, human. Let us see how quickly bones break. His voice was deep with satisfaction. He expected to watch her fall. He expected to laugh louder than ever before. The human stepped forward, her boots striking the stone ground with steady rhythm. No rush, no stumble, each step sure, her small frame moving into the shadow of the pit. The beast snarled and struck the ground with its hooves. The earth shuddered under its power. But the human walked on, calm, silent, unbroken. The cadets leaned forward, eager to see the blood, eager to hear the cries, eager to watch a human destroyed before their eyes. The sergeant's grin widened. He folded his arms across his chest, certain of the end, certain that the story of the human cadet would finish before it began. But deep in the silence, hidden in the calm, there was something else, something unseen, something waiting to strike. And as the beast roared and charged, the academy held its breath, because in that moment, something about the human did not feel weak at all. The roar of the beast shook the pit, and dust rained from the high stone walls of the academy. Cadets leaned over the railing to watch. Some laughed, some whispered, all certain that the human cadet would be torn apart in seconds. The drill sergeant stood above with his arms crossed, his eyes narrow and sharp, his grin filled with cruel hunger for what he believed was the inevitable. The beast pawed the ground with its armored hooves. Sparks flew from the stone floor as tusks longer than swords scraped against the pit walls. Its massive body pulsed with muscle. Its armored hide glistened with sweat and blood. It was a monster built for breaking spirits, bred for crushing bones, fed with fury, so it never hesitated. This was the beast every cadet feared, and now the smallest cadet stood alone before it. The human stepped forward, her boots echoing softly, her breathing calm and steady. No fear in her eyes, no trembling in her body. She moved with quiet control. She looked fragile compared to the towering creature, her bones thin, her arms light, her skin pale under the harsh light. Yet she stood still as if the monster before her was nothing more than the storm waiting to pass. The sergeant laughed loud, his voice booming over the pit. Now we see the truth of humanity. Now we see how quickly they fall. His words struck the air like a whip. The cadets around him chuckled and muttered, eager for the blood to flow, eager for the end of the human story. The beast charged. The ground thundered with every step. Dust and stone flew as it lowered its tusks, its jaws wide, its red eyes burning like fire. The cadets gasped in delight. Their voices rose in a wave of sound, their hearts certain that the human would be crushed in a single instant. But the human did not run. She did not freeze. She shifted her weight lightly to the side, her movements so small and so fast that the beast's tusks grazed only empty air. The charge carried the monster past her, its weight slamming into the wall with a deafening crash. The crowd fell silent for a breath, stunned by what they saw. The sergeant's grin faltered for the first time. The beast spun with rage, its tail whipping like a chain, its claws gouging the stone. It charged again, this time faster, its tusks aimed high, its jaws snapping, its power so great that the ground cracked beneath it. But once again the human moved, quick as lightning. Her body bent low, her boots slid across the dust, and the beast's attack struck only shadows. Gasps rose from the cadets. Disbelief spread like a wave, their eyes wide, their whispers sharp. Some muttered that it was luck. Others whispered that no one could dodge twice. But deep down they began to sense something else, something they could not yet name. The sergeant growled low in his throat, his arms tightening, his claws digging into his palms as he watched. The human's eyes never left the beast, her breath steady, her body loose yet coiled like a spring. She did not waste movement. She did not flinch. Every step was placed with precision, every shift measured, her silence stronger than any cry, her calm heavier than any roar. The beast roared again, furious now, its hide glistening, its muscles straining. It lunged with both tusks and claws, its massive body filling the pit like a storm. Dust and rock burst into the air. The crowd screamed in awe, but the human ducked low, rolled across the dirt, rose in a smooth motion, and turned to face it again, untouched, unbroken, calm as ever. The cadets began to murmur louder, some no longer mocking, some now uneasy. Their voices carried fear they did not expect to feel. For if a human could evade such power, what else could a human do? The sergeant snarled, his laughter gone, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward, watching every move. The beast was enraged, its breaths ragged, its eyes burning brighter. It slammed its hooves against the stone floor, cracks spreading under its weight. It reared high and came down like a falling mountain, its tusks aimed to crush the human beneath its bulk. The moment seemed certain. The crowd held its breath. But the human moved again, faster than before, a sudden blur of motion, her small frame sliding between tusks, her hand striking the beast's jaw with perfect timing. The sound echoed like thunder as the monster's head snapped to the side. Its tusks slammed into the ground, Its legs buckled under the force, and in the silence that followed, the beast crashed down onto the stone floor, its massive body trembling, its jaw broken, its roar turned to a choking groan. The pit fell silent. Cadets stared with wide eyes, their jaws slack, their whispers frozen in their throats. No one had expected this. No one had believed it possible. Yet before them the beast lay defeated. Not by strength, not by claws, not by size, but by speed, by precision, by a human. The drill sergeant's mouth opened, but no laughter came. His eyes burned with confusion and anger. His chest rose heavy with disbelief. He snarled low as he watched the human stand tall over the fallen beast, untouched, her uniform barely dusted, her face calm as stone. The cadets erupted at last, some shouting, some gasping, some cheering in spite of themselves. Their voices clashed in a storm of disbelief and wonder. The whispers grew louder, spreading like fire. They asked how. They asked what kind of creature a human truly was. They asked if they had been wrong all along. The sergeant silenced them with a roar, his voice cracking like thunder, his claws raised, his tail striking the ground. "It was luck," he bellowed. "Do not be deceived. Strength is what wins, not tricks, not chance. Strength will always crush weakness." His words rang heavy, but not all cadets believed, their eyes still on the human, their whispers still strong. The human turned her head slowly, her eyes lifted toward the sergeant, calm, unbroken. Not a word from her lips, only silence. But that silence was heavier than any roar, heavier than any cry. It struck the sergeant harder than any weapon. It made his heart burn with rage. It made his pride ache. The beast groaned again, its broken jaw hanging, its massive body twitching. The human stepped back from it, her boots steady, her posture straight, her calm unshaken. The pit was hers. The moment was hers. And though she said nothing, every cadet understood that something had changed, something greater than they could yet name. The sergeant knew it too, deep in his heart, though he fought to deny it, though he tried to smother it with rage. He knew this was not the end. He knew he could not leave it here. He would test her again. He would break her. He would crush her before the eyes of all the cadets. For if he failed, then the legend of a human would rise, and nothing could silence it. The crowd roared once more as the human left the pit, her head high, her steps slow and steady, not a tremor in her body, not a mark on her skin, only the faint sound of dust falling from her boots. The cadets parted as she walked past, their eyes wide, their whispers sharp, the silence of her steps stronger than all their voices. The drill sergeant glared after her, his pride wounded, his heart dark with anger, his claws tight, his voice low with fury as he muttered to himself, "The next test will break her." But even as he spoke, a shadow of doubt crept into his mind, a shadow that whispered that the human was not weak, that the human was something far more dangerous. The pit was silent after the fall of the beast. The cadets who only moments before had shouted and laughed now stood and rose with uncertain eyes. The ground still trembled faintly from the impact of the fallen monster. Dust swirled in the air, and in the center of it all stood the human cadet, her uniform smeared with dirt yet her body untouched, her breath calm, her face unreadable. She was small against the shadow of the massive creature, yet in that moment she looked taller than the walls of the academy. The drill sergeant growled deep in his chest, his scaled throat rattling with rage. He forced a laugh loud enough to echo across the grounds, but the sound was strained, harsh, and unsteady. His eyes burned with pride fighting against doubt. He pointed his claw toward the cadets and roared, "Do not be fooled. It was only a beast, a mindless brute, nothing more. The true test is battle against warriors. The true test is strength against strength, and there a human will fail." His words shook the air, but his voice did not carry the same certainty it once had. The cadets looked at one another, their whispers rising like restless wind. Some muttered agreement with the sergeant, some nodded, yet others frowned. Others whispered that what they had seen was no trick, no accident, but skill, precision, something rare, something deadly. The laughter that once filled their ranks had shifted. Now it was uncertain. Now it was thin. Now it carried fear. The human did not speak. She stood still, her gaze forward, her silence like a blade sharper than any weapon. her stillness louder than any roar. The cadets could not look away from her, some with awe, some with fear, some with doubt. The sergeant noticed this. He felt it slipping. He felt his control fraying, and that made his anger grow like fire in dry grass. He roared again and pointed to the sparring ring, a circle of iron where cadets fought under the gaze of the academy. "You three," he bellowed, his claws stabbing toward three of the largest cadets, a scaled brute with horns, a spiked creature with claws, and a towering insectoid with armored arms. "You will fight the human together, no mercy, no holding back. Show the academy that strength will always crush weakness." The chosen cadets stepped forward, their armor clanking, their eyes sharp, their grins cruel. They bowed to the sergeant with pride, confident that this would restore his laughter, confident that the human's fragile form would at last break under their blows. They entered the ring, weapons gleaming, claws sharp, voices hissing with hunger for blood. The human was given only a staff of wood, light and simple, no blades, no spikes, no armor, only a stick in her hands. The cadets laughed openly at this, their voices rising again, mocking her, mocking the idea that such a tool could stand against steel and claw, mocking her for daring to step forward at all. The sergeant smiled once more, a cruel grin that showed teeth, but his eyes betrayed unease, his laughter no longer pure. The ring closed, the crowd pressed close, their whispers buzzing, their breaths quick. The three cadets circled the human, their movements heavy with strength, their weapons glinting, their bodies towering like walls. The insectoid clicked its mandibles. The horned brute slammed his fists together. The spiked cadet hissed sharp and low. And then the signal rang. The three attacked at once, their weapons crashing down with speed, their claws slashing the air, their strikes shaking the iron floor. But the human moved like water, flowing between blows, her staff whipping up with sharp precision, wood clashing against metal with a crack, sparks flashing, dust swirling. The cadets gasped as one by one their attacks missed. The human struck once at the horned brute's knee, her staff snapping against bone. The giant stumbled with a roar. She spun and struck the spiked cadet across the chest. The air burst with the sound of impact. Armor cracked. The creature hissed in pain. She ducked under the insectoid's claws and rose with a strike to its jaw. The mandibles snapped with a sickening crunch. The towering figure reeled backward. The crowd roared with disbelief, voices clashing in a storm. Some cheered, some gasped, some shouted in anger, but none could deny what they saw. The human was not falling. The human was not weak. The human was fighting and winning. Each movement sharp, precise, unstoppable. Her body light yet deadly. Her silence unbroken. Her eyes calm as ice. The sergeant roared from above. "Fight harder, crush her, destroy her." His voice cracked with fury. But the three cadets could not. They swung and slashed. But she was too fast, too sharp, too sure. Each time they missed. Each time she struck. Her staff a blur of wood and force. The sound of cracking bones and shattering weapons filled the ring. In moments it was over. The horned brute lay on the ground clutching his knee, groaning in pain. The spiked cadet lay on his back, his chest armor shattered, his claws limp. The insectoid staggered before collapsing with his mandibles broken. All three defeated, all three groaning in the dust, and the human stood tall in the center, her staff steady, her breath calm, untouched once again. The ring fell silent. The cadets stared with wide eyes, their whispers now sharp with awe, sharp with fear. No laughter remained, no mocking words, only silence and disbelief. The sergeant's claws dug into the railing, his tail lashed against the floor, his pride bleeding, his laughter gone, his voice silent. The human lifted her staff slightly, her gaze still forward, her silence still unbroken, and in that silence the cadets felt something shift. They felt respect, they felt fear, they felt the weight of a truth they did not want to believe. That strength was not only in claws, not only in armor, not only in size, but in skill, in control, in will, and that will was something the human carried like fire. The sergeant's chest rose and fell, his eyes burning, his pride screaming, his voice trapped. For the first time in years, he felt the gaze of his cadets not on him, but on another. Their whispers no longer about his power, but about the human. Their voices no longer chanting his strength, but her skill. his grip on their fear slipping away. He roared again, his voice shaking the walls. "This is not over. This is only the beginning. Strength will crush her. I will crush her." His words thundered, but even as they echoed through the academy, the cadets did not believe them fully. Their eyes betrayed doubt. Their whispers betrayed change. The laughter that once followed his every word had died, and in its place was silence and unease. The human left the ring, her staff at her side, her steps steady. The cadets parted again as she passed, their eyes following her, their hearts racing, their minds burning with the image of her victory, their respect growing even as fear tangled in their throats. And though she said nothing, though she never looked back, every cadet knew she had already become something greater than they had expected. And above them all the sergeant stood, his claws trembling with rage, his pride shattered, yet his determination burning stronger. He would not let this stand. He would not let a human rise above him. He would fight her himself. He would break her before all. He would restore the fear and laughter he had lost. For if he failed, then the academy would never be the same again. The air in the academy was heavy with dust and silence. The broken bodies of the 3 cadets still lay groaning in the ring. The smell of sweat and blood lingered sharp and bitter. The crowd of warriors shifted uneasily, their whispers low, their eyes restless, their belief shaken. They had seen something that could not be unseen. They had watched the human defeat what should have been unbeatable, and now nothing felt certain anymore. The drill sergeant towered above them all. His claws gripped the railing so tight that the metal bent beneath his strength. His eyes blazed with fire. His chest rose with deep growls that rattled in his throat. His pride torn, his authority cracked, his laughter gone. He had mocked the human once. He had promised her weakness. He had sworn her defeat. Yet she stood untouched, and the cadets no longer looked at him with fear, but at her with awe. He felt it like knives across his skin, and he could not allow it to last. He roared, his voice thundering through the academy like a storm. "Enough games, enough tricks. Strength decides the victor, and strength belongs to me. Human, step forward. Face me if you dare. Face the claws that have broken armies. Face the power that no cadet has ever survived." His words shook the walls. His voice cracked the silence. The cadets gasped in disbelief, for never had the sergeant lowered himself to challenge a cadet. Never had he dirted his own claws against the unproven. And yet here he was, his pride demanding it, his fury demanding it. The human turned her head, her gaze rising toward him, her eyes steady, calm, unbroken. She did not speak. She did not falter. She simply stepped forward into the ring, her staff still in her hand, her boots striking the ground with steady rhythm. The cadets parted once more, their eyes wide, their whispers frantic. Some muttered that she was mad. Some whispered that she was doomed. Yet others whispered that perhaps she could win. Perhaps even this was not beyond her. And that whisper spread, like fire in dry grass, dangerous, unstoppable. The sergeant leapt from the railing, his massive body crashing into the ring with a quake that shook the iron floor. Dust burst upward. The sound echoed like thunder. He stood tall and terrible, scales gleaming, claws sharp as blades, tail lashing like a whip. His mouth spread wide in a snarl that bared teeth long as knives. He towered over the human like a mountain of muscle and fury. The cadets fell silent at the sight, their hearts pounding, their voices trapped, the air electric with fear and anticipation. The sergeant pointed one claw at the human, his voice low and venomous. "I will break you. I will crush you. I will remind every cadet here what it means to stand before power. You will not walk away from this ring. You will crawl or you will bleed, but you will not stand." His words dripped with hate, his pride bleeding from every syllable, his rage burning brighter than fire. The human raised her staff, her posture straight, her eyes locked on him, her silence heavier than any answer, and that silence made his fury boil hotter, for silence was defiance, silence was strength, silence was proof that she did not fear him, and he could not bear it. The signal rang and the sergeant lunged, his claws flashing through the air, his massive body moving with speed that defied his size. The ground shook beneath him. The air cracked with the force of his strike, but the human stepped aside, light and fast, her boots sliding across the dust. His claws slashed only air. Sparks flew as they struck the floor. The crowd gasped. their voices bursting, for no one had ever dodged his first blow. No cadet had ever seen it and lived. The sergeant growled, his tail whipping, his eyes burning brighter. He struck again, faster, stronger, claws sweeping in arcs that tore the air. Each strike loud as thunder, each strike enough to shred armor. But the human flowed around him, her body bending, twisting, sliding, each movement perfect, each step measured, her staff whipping up to deflect, to redirect, to survive. The cadets cried out in disbelief, their voices torn between awe and fear. The battle raged, the sergeant's fury growing with each missed strike. His claws gouged the iron, sparks flashing, dust rising. The ring shook with every step, yet the human still stood, still moved, still struck when the moment opened. Her staff rapped against his arm. Her staff struck his side. Her staff cracked against his chest. Light yet sharp, each strike precise, each strike placed where it hurt most. Not enough to kill, but enough to sting, enough to wound his pride. The cadets began to whisper again, their voices sharp, their disbelief thick. They had never seen the sergeant falter, never seen him miss, never seen him bleed. Yet now they watched his scales bruise. They watched his arms shake with rage. They watched his breath grow heavy. They saw what no one had dared imagine, that the sergeant was mortal, that the sergeant could be beaten. The sergeant roared louder than ever, his fury burning, his pride screaming, his claws lashed in a frenzy, his body a storm of violence, dust and sparks flying, the ring shaking with every strike. He would not stop. He would not yield. He would not allow a human to shame him. He poured every ounce of his power into the battle, his body straining, his muscles tearing, his voice cracking the air. But the human remained calm, her eyes steady, her breath even, her staff sharp and quick, her body a shadow that flowed around his fury. She ducked low. She rolled aside. She spun and struck, each motion small but perfect, each strike like lightning. And the cadets felt their hearts pound as they watched the impossible unfold. They watched their sergeant lose control. They watched the human remain unbroken. The fight grew longer. The sergeant's breaths grew heavier, his arms slower, his claws less sharp, his body drenched with sweat, his scales cut and bruised, his tail dragging. Yet the human still moved, still calm, still steady, her silence unbroken, her will unshaken. And the cadets could feel it now. They could feel the truth pressing in on them, that strength alone was not enough, that size and fury were not enough, that something greater was here, and it belonged to the human. The sergeant staggered back for the first time, his claws trembling, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with rage and fear. The cadets gasped, some shouting, some cheering, some whispering in awe. The human raised her staff once more, her gaze never leaving him, her silence cutting deeper than any blade. And in that silence the sergeant felt the weight of every eye upon him, felt the fear creeping into his own heart. He roared again, a sound of desperation, of fury, of broken pride, and charged, his body a blur of muscle and rage, his claws raised high, his teeth bared, his tail lashing. He threw everything he had into the strike, every ounce of strength, every shred of pride, every drop of rage. And the cadets held their breath, the air heavy, the ground trembling. The human waited, her body steady, her eyes calm, her staff raised, and at the last instant she moved, light and sharp. Her staff cracked against his arm, her body slid aside, his claws struck only air, his massive body carried forward past her, stumbling, faltering. For the first time in his life, he had missed so fully, so completely, and the cadets gasped in shock, their voices rising like a storm. The sergeant turned with fury in his eyes, but he knew in his heart that this battle was no longer his. He knew the cadets had seen the truth. He knew his power was not enough, and that knowledge cut deeper than any wound. It tore at his pride. It shredded his certainty. It left him burning with hate. And the human stood tall, her staff steady, her eyes calm, her silence heavy, and the academy trembled with the weight of what had begun. The ring was a storm of dust and echoing roars. The cadets pressed close against the iron barriers, their eyes wide, their voices trembling. They had never seen their sergeant falter, never seen him stumble, never seen him bleed. Yet now the impossible had been shown. The great reptilian warrior who had broken thousands of cadets before now stood with his chest heaving, his scales bruised, his claws trembling, and opposite him the human cadet stood calm, silent, her staff steady in her hands, her gaze sharp and unbroken. The drill sergeant bared his fangs, his breath came heavy and ragged, his pride screamed within him, his heart thundered with rage. He could not accept this. He would not accept this. His honor demanded her destruction. His authority demanded her defeat. His power demanded her end. He roared with a fury that shook the academy walls, the sound so fierce that some cadets flinched, though the roar was not meant for them. His tail lashed against the iron floor. Sparks flew as his claws carved into the stone, his body a living storm ready to tear apart anything in his path. The cadets whispered, their voices sharp and uncertain. Some muttered that the sergeant still held greater strength. Others whispered that he had already lost. Their words filled the air like restless wings. The human ignored them all, her eyes fixed on her enemy, her breath calm, her posture unbroken, her silence louder than any chant. It was not weakness they saw in her. It was not fear. It was will, and it unsettled them more than the sergeant's roars ever could. The sergeant lunged, his body a blur of muscle and hate, his claws slashing in arcs that split the air, his strikes so fast the air itself seemed to scream. But the human moved with precision, her body bending low, her feet sliding across the dust, her staff whipping to deflect, to redirect, to sting. Sparks and echoes filled the air. Wood struck against scale, claws struck against iron. The ring shook as if the ground itself feared the clash. Blow after blow came, the sergeant relentless, his fury endless, his strength like a crashing tide. Yet the human endured. Her staff cracked against his ribs, snapped against his arm, struck his jaw with sharp precision. Each strike small but perfect, each one a needle-piercing pride. The cadets gasped with every sound, their whispers rising, their disbelief growing. The sergeant had sworn that strength alone would win, yet here he was, mighty and furious, and still unable to crush her. The battle stretched long. Sweat streamed down the sergeant's scales, his arms burned, his chest ached, his breath ragged. Each movement slower, heavier, less certain. The human remained steady, her movements sharp, her strikes deliberate, her silence constant. She was the eye of the storm, calm while chaos raged around her, and that calm made the cadets tremble, for it was a calm that did not break, a calm that did not fear, a calm that did not lose. At last the human struck hard, her staff cracking against the sergeant's chest with a sound like thunder. The air burst with shock. The great reptilian staggered backward. His claws clutched at the dented scale. His breath broke in a growl of pain. The cadets erupted in cries. Some shouted in disbelief. Some cheered despite fear. Others fell silent with awe. The sergeant's eyes burned with fury and shame. He had been struck where no cadet had ever reached. He had been wounded before the eyes of all. The sergeant's pride shattered like glass. His rage consumed him. He roared and charged again, no longer measured, no longer precise. His strikes wild, desperate, a storm without focus. His claws gouged the iron. His tail tore through dust. His teeth snapped in fury. But desperation is weakness. Desperation is reckless. And the human saw it. She read it. She waited, her body loose yet ready, her staff gripped tight, her eyes never leaving him. She dodged low beneath his claws, spun aside from his tail, struck his leg with sharp precision, struck his arm again, struck his chest once more, each blow like a hammer striking the cracks of pride, each blow widening the fracture. The sergeant stumbled. His claws missed. His rage burned hotter, yet his strength drained faster. The cadets gasped at the sight, their fear turning to awe, their awe turning to respect, their respect turning to something far more dangerous, belief. The human pressed forward, her strikes faster now, her staff a blur. The sound of wood clashing against scale filled the air. The sergeant staggered back again and again, his arms raised to block, his tail thrashing wild, his claws snapping empty, his strength failing, his breath heaving like thunder. And the cadets cried out with every strike, their voices a storm louder than his roars, their belief shifting from the sergeant to the human before their eyes. The sergeant fell to one knee, his body trembling, his scales bruised, his pride shredded, yet still his eyes burned, still his voice roared, I am not defeated. I will not fall. I am strength. I am power. You are nothing. You are only bones and blood. His words thundered with fury, but his voice cracked with doubt. His body shook with weakness, and his pride bled with every syllable. The human said nothing. She raised her staff, her gaze steady, her silence louder than his roar, and the cadets felt the weight of that silence. They felt the truth of it. They felt the end approaching. They held their breath as the sergeant roared once more, forcing his body to rise, forcing his claws to lift, forcing his pride to drive him forward. He charged again. One last desperate strike. One last storm of fury. One last attempt to prove strength alone could not be broken. The human waited, her body steady, her staff lifted, her breath calm, and at the perfect instant she moved. She struck his arm, struck his chest, struck his jaw. Each blow fast as lightning, each blow sharp as thunder. The sergeant stumbled. His claws fell. His knees struck the iron. His body bent under the weight of defeat. The cadets gasped in awe, their voices frozen, their hearts pounding with the truth of what they had seen. The sergeant knelt in the ring, his body trembling, his pride shattered, his authority gone, his laughter silenced, and opposite him the human cadet stood tall, her staff steady, her eyes unbroken, her silence victorious. The cadets whispered in awe, in fear, in respect. They had seen the unthinkable. They had seen the impossible. They had seen their sergeant broken by a human, and the academy would never be the same again. But the battle was not yet over, for though the sergeant had fallen to his knees, though his strength drained and his body shook, his pride still burned, his rage still screamed. He refused to admit defeat. He refused to bow. His claws trembled as they dug into the iron. His tail thrashed, his breath heavy. He growled low, a sound like a dying storm, yet still a storm. He would rise again, he would fight again. He would not accept the truth, even as it crushed him. The cadets waited, their voices hushed, their eyes wide. They did not know what would come next. They did not know if the sergeant could rise. They did not know if the human would strike again. The air hung heavy with suspense. The ground trembled beneath the weight of history, and in that moment they all knew they were standing on the edge of something greater than themselves, something that would echo across the academy forever. The ring smelled of dust and blood. The walls trembled with the echoes of roars now fading into silence. The cadets pressed tight against the iron barriers, their eyes wide, their bodies tense, their hearts pounding with disbelief. They had watched their sergeant fall to one knee. They had seen his claws shake. They had heard his breath break. Yet still he growled. Still he forced his body to rise. His pride stronger than his strength, his fury louder than his weakness. He would not accept defeat, not before his cadets, not before the human. The drill sergeant rose with a snarl, his body trembling yet his eyes burning, his scales cracked and bruised, his chest heaving like a storm, his claws dripping with blood from his own torn skin. Yet his voice thundered, "I am not broken. I am not beaten. No human can stand above me. No fragile creature can claim victory here." His roar shook the walls, though the power in it was cracked, though the certainty in it was thin, though the cadets who once cheered his every word now whispered doubt. Into the air. The human stood across the ring, her staff gripped steady, her eyes calm, her breath even, her silence unbroken, her body light but sure. She had no scars, no tremors, no fear. She watched him with the same steady gaze that had carried her through the beast, through the three cadets, through every strike of the sergeant, and that silence weighed on him heavier than any wound, for silence was defiance, silence was strength, silence was proof that his power no longer ruled this place. The cadets whispered louder now, their voices a storm of disbelief. Some muttered that the sergeant would rise and crush her still. Others whispered that he could not. Others whispered that he had already lost. Their words filled the air, their belief shifting with every breath, their fear shifting into awe, their awe shifting into respect. And the sergeant felt it burning against his pride. He could feel them slipping from his grip, slipping toward her, slipping toward a truth he could not allow. With a roar that cracked the ground beneath him, he charged, his body a storm of scale and fury, his claws slashing, his tail whipping, his teeth bared. He struck with all his power, all his hate, all his pride. The ring shook with the force of his rage. Sparks and dust filled the air. The cadets gasped and cried out, their voices sharp, their hearts certain that this strike would end it. But the human moved like water, her feet sliding across the dust, her body bending and flowing, her staff rising sharp and quick, would met claw with a crack like thunder. The force shuddered through the air. She turned to strike aside. She struck his arm. She struck his chest. She struck his leg. Each blow fast as lightning, precise as a blade. The sergeant stumbled with every hit, his massive body crashing against the iron floor, his roars breaking into growls of pain. The cadets shouted, their voices louder now, their disbelief twisting into cries of awe. Never had they seen such speed, such precision, such will. Never had they seen their sergeant struck so many times. Never had they seen him falter again and again. And with every strike the whispers grew stronger. Whispers that the human was no weakling. Whispers that the human was something more, something dangerous, something powerful. The sergeant rose once more, his body broken yet his pride burning, his eyes wild with fury, his voice cracked with hate. I will not fall. I will not bow. You cannot defeat me. You cannot defeat strength. He roared, his claws trembling, his breath shallow, his tail dragging across the floor, his body betraying the truth. His pride refused to speak. The human stepped forward, her staff steady, her silence sharp. She did not answer. She did not boast. She did not roar. She only moved, her body light, her strikes faster now, sharper now, relentless. She struck his chest again. She struck his arm again. She struck his leg again, each blow breaking him piece by piece, each strike carving his pride apart. The sound of wood against scale filled the ring like drums of war. The sergeant staggered, his knees bent, his claws scraped the floor. His eyes burned with fury, yet also with fear. Fear he had never known. Fear that cut deeper than any wound. Fear that came not from pain but from truth. The truth that strength alone was not enough. The truth that size and rage could be broken. The truth that a human had shown him his weakness before the eyes of all. The cadets erupted, their voices loud, their cries sharp. Some shouted the human's name though they did not know it. Some cheered for her, though they had mocked her only hours before. Their voices thundered louder than the sergeant's roars. Their belief shifted fully now. Their respect no longer his. Their fear no longer his to command. It belonged to her, and he felt it burn like fire through his chest. He charged again, desperate, broken, wild, his claws slashing in fury, his teeth snapping with hate, his body crashing forward like a falling mountain. But desperation is weakness. Desperation is blind. Desperation is the cry of one already defeated. And the human saw it. She stepped aside with calm precision, her staff whipping up with perfect timing. She struck his jaw. She struck his chest. She struck his skull. Each blow fast. Each blow final. Each blow the end. The sergeant roared one last time, a sound of pride breaking, of fury shattering, of strength failing. And then his massive body crashed to the floor. The ground shook beneath him. The ring trembled. Dust burst into the air. Silence fell across the academy. Silence heavy. Silence absolute. The cadets stared with wide eyes, their voices gone, their breath caught. For the unthinkable had happened. The sergeant had fallen. The human stood tall above him, her staff steady, her breath calm, her silence unbroken. She looked down at the massive warrior who once mocked her, who once laughed at her, who once swore her defeat, and now lay broken before her, his pride shattered, his strength spent, his body trembling. She did not smile. She did not boast. She simply stood, calm, steady, silent. The cadets erupted at last, their voices a storm. Their cries thundered through the academy. They cheered. They shouted. They roared. Their fear gone. Their belief changed. Their respect now hers. They pounded their fists against their armor. They raised their weapons. They cried for her, a human, one who had stood alone, one who had defeated the beast, one who had defeated the sergeant himself. The sergeant groaned, his claws scraping weakly against the iron, his eyes hazed, his pride broken. He looked up at her with hatred, and with something else, something he had never felt before, respect. He whispered low, his voice weak, human, the word heavy. You are no weakling. You are no fragile creature. You are a warrior. His voice cracked. His body collapsed. His pride finally surrendered. The human remained silent, her gaze steady, her staff lowered. She did not answer. She did not need to, for her silence was already louder than any words. Her silence had already spoken to every cadet. Her silence had already written history into their hearts. The Academy had changed forever. The galaxy itself would soon change, for they had seen the truth of humanity. Not weak, not fragile, but dangerous, unyielding, unbroken. And as the dust settled over the ring, as the cadets roared her name, as the sergeant lay defeated, the legend of the human cadet began. The Academy grounds trembled with the echoes of voices raised high. The iron walls shook with the sound of cadets pounding their fists against their armor. Their cries thundered into the skies above. And for the first time since its creation, the roar of the drill sergeant was drowned by the roar of those who had once feared him. They no longer chanted his name. They no longer looked to him with awe. Their eyes and their respect belonged now to the human cadet who stood alone in the ring with her staff steady, her gaze calm, her silence unbroken. The drill sergeant lay on the floor of the ring, his massive body broken, his scales cracked, his claws dull with exhaustion, his tail limp against the dust, his breath heavy, his voice weak, his pride shattered. Yet even as his strength left him, he forced his head up, his eyes blazing with a fire not of hatred now, but of reluctant respect, his gaze locked on the human, his voice rough as gravel. Human, you are not weak. You are not fragile. You are warrior. The words cut the air heavy and sharp. Words no cadet had ever heard from his mouth before. Words that carried the weight of defeat and the weight of truth. The human said nothing. She stood silent, her staff gripped in her hands, her eyes steady, her body tall though small, her breath calm, her silence louder than the roars around her, louder than the sergeant's broken voice. Her silence was victory. Her silence was strength, and every cadet knew it. Every cadet felt it. Every cadet understood that silence itself had crushed the pride of their sergeant more than any roar could have done. The cadets began to chant not with laughter, not with mockery, but with voices filled with awe, voices filled with fear, voices filled with respect. They chanted for the human. They raised her in their cries. They spoke her strength into the air. And the sergeant who had once been the unshakable mountain of the Academy now lay low, while the fragile creature he mocked had risen above all. Whispers spread like wildfire, whispers of what this meant, whispers that if one human cadet could defeat the strongest of them all, then what would an army of humans be? Whispers that the galaxy had been wrong to see humanity as fragile, whispers that strength was not measured only in claws, in armor, in size, but in will, in speed, in calm, in silence, whispers that this moment would change everything. The sergeant forced himself up on one elbow, his body trembling, his pride shattered, yet he raised one claw and lowered his head, a gesture older than the Academy itself, a gesture of surrender, a gesture of respect, one that no cadet had ever seen him give, one that no cadet had ever believed he was capable of. And in that moment the human cadet received the honor no alien had ever claimed, the respect of the drill sergeant himself. The cadets fell silent for a breath, their eyes wide, their hearts pounding. They watched the strongest bow his head. They watched the human stand tall, and they understood that the world they knew had ended and a new one had begun. For respect once given by the sergeant was never taken back. Respect once given spread like fire through the Academy, through the legions, through the stars. The human remained still, her staff lowered, her silence steady. She did not bow. She did not speak. She accepted nothing. She demanded nothing. And yet in her stillness the respect deepened. In her silence the legend grew. For silence cannot be argued. Silence cannot be mocked. Silence cannot be broken. And in that silence the cadets saw not weakness but power, not fragility but steel. The sergeant staggered to his feet with the help of his claws, his body bent but his eyes clear. He looked upon the cadets. He roared though his voice cracked. You have seen strength. You have seen will. You have seen what it means to fight beyond fear. Learn from this human. Fear her. Respect her. For she is warrior, and warrior deserves honor. His words carried across the grounds. Heavy, final, undeniable. The cadets raised their fists again, not in mockery but in salute, not in laughter but in respect. They shouted, they roared. They filled the sky with cries for the human. Their voices shook the walls. Their hearts thundered. Their respect burned hotter than fire. And in that storm of voices the humans still stood silent, calm, unbroken. That silence became legend before the sun set. It spread through the academy like a tide. It spread through the barracks, through the training yards, through the halls of steel and stone. Whispers became chants. Chants became stories. Stories became truth. And the truth was that a human had faced the impossible and prevailed. A human had stood against the beast. A human had stood against 3 cadets. A human had stood against the drill sergeant. And in every battle the human had not fallen. The galaxy beyond the walls of the academy would soon hear it. The generals would hear it. The officers would hear it. The rulers would hear it. And they would question what they once believed. They would wonder if the fragile species they overlooked was in truth the most dangerous of all. They would fear the silence of humanity. They would fear the calm that had broken the storm. The sergeant limped from the ring with his pride broken yet his honor intact. For though he had fallen, he had given respect. Though he had been defeated, he had admitted truth. And in that admission, the academy itself had shifted. Never again would cadets laugh so freely at a human. Never again would whispers of weakness spread without fear. For the memory of this day would live in every soldier who had seen it. The memory of silence standing tall over strength. The human walked from the ring slow and steady, her boots echoing on the iron, her staff at her side, her head high. She did not smile. She did not speak. She did not look back. The cadets parted before her like water before stone, their eyes wide, their voices hushed, their respect unshakable. And as she passed each of them, they felt it deep in their bones, the weight of her will, the strength of her silence, the truth of her power. In the barracks that night the cadets whispered still. They spoke of the way she moved, the way she struck, the way she never feared, the way she never spoke. They spoke of the look in her eyes, the calm that froze even the sergeant. They spoke of what this meant, what this could mean for the galaxy. And their voices grew louder, sharper, filled with awe, filled with fear, filled with respect. The stars above the academy burned cold and bright, the silence of the night heavy. Yet inside the walls a new fire had been born, a fire that would not fade, a fire that would spread through the legions, through the armies, through the empires, the fire of belief in humanity, belief that the fragile were not fragile, belief that the weak were not weak, belief that silence could break storms and calm could shatter mountains. And in that silence the human cadet lay in her bunk, her staff beside her, her eyes closed, her breath calm, her body still. She did not hear the whispers. She did not need to, for she knew what she had done. She knew what had begun. She knew that respect once earned would carry further than any roar, further than any claw, further than any strike. And she knew that this was only the beginning. The drill sergeant sat alone in his chamber, his body aching, his pride torn, yet his eyes steady now, his voice quiet as he muttered to himself, "Human, you are dangerous. Human, you are unlike any I have seen, and the galaxy will learn, whether it wishes to or not." His words faded into the silence, yet even in silence he knew they were true. Thus ended the day when the alien drill sergeant laughed at the human cadet, and thus began the legend of the human whose silence had broken laughter, whose calm had broken storms, whose will had broken the unbreakable. And the academy would never forget, the cadets would never forget, the galaxy itself would never forget.